Good morning, everybody. Yep, so I'm Ben. So just to introduce myself, so obviously I'm from Australia. As well as doing the master's study, I'm studying about international relations. I've been working at the Japan Center for International Exchange and the East Asia Forum at the Australian National University. So this is just the map of Australia. And to myself, I'm from Canberra, which you can see is just a little bit south of Sydney, between Sydney and Melbourne, the capital city of Australia.
Which many people actually mistake, right? Many people believe the capital of Australia is Sydney.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yeah, so actually...
Commercial capital is Sydney, right? Kind of commercial capital. I mean,
like
so
financial center.
The biggest city is Sydney, and the second biggest city is Melbourne. And when the states united and became a country, then there was a fight or a dispute over which city should be the capital city. And instead of choosing Sydney or Melbourne, they built a new city in between to be the capital city. So here's just some basic information about Australia. So how is it different to Japan? So Australia is a much bigger country. Australia is the sixth biggest country in the world in terms of land area. It's more than 20 times the size of Japan. And in terms of population, it's much smaller. We have just over 20 million people. So Japan's population is about 6 times as many as Australia. I don't know what your image of Australia is. If you think of Australian people, do you think of someone like me, like white person? Or
totally.
But so what I want to show is Australia is a very diverse country. So we have a lot of different people, a lot of different religions, a lot of different races. So Australia is a multicultural nation. Just some quick facts here. So Australia being an immigration nation. So that's the point here is we have a lot of people who are immigrating to Australia. So actually like about more than 30% of Australians have been born overseas.
Which is absolutely different from Japan,
Yeah.
where almost everyone was born here. Right?
Exactly. So if you can think of that, like you're at your workplace or in your classroom, and then 1 out of 3 of the people there are not born in the country.
What about your own experience? Where you were in school, elementary school, high school, were there many like foreign-born people in your classes?
Oh yeah, definitely. And there's a wide variety of places that people have come from as well. And I mean, for me, I don't even think about it. It's just totally normal. It's not something that I ever considered to be that strange until I came to somewhere like Japan, where it's so different, and where Japan has a very different society. So next, I'll just talk about some history of migration. So actually, the different states were British colonies, and in 1901, the different states came together. So the word is called federation, which means they joined together to become one country. And then at this time, they created a policy called the White Australia policy, which was a racist policy of having immigration of whites only. Actually, at this time, Australia wasn't just white people. So the first people to come to Australia were the Aboriginals, the native, the indigenous people, or like Genjumi. So they came to Australia more than 40,000 years ago. And then Europeans discovered Australia, Captain James Cook, just a couple of 100 years ago. But then also, like in the 1850s, there was a lot of Asians who were coming to Australia, like Chinese were coming to Australia for the gold rush era and for finding gold in the Victorian rivers. So those Australians, or those Chinese who had come to Australia in the gold rush era, those Australians could stay. They had to apply for a kind of special permission to be exempt from the white Australian laws, but no new immigration from non-white countries was allowed during this time, and they had tests to whether you're allowed to emigrate or not. Then after World War II, then Australia needed more labourers, so we relaxed the immigration policy to not just like strictly British whites, and then we had a wave of immigration of Greeks and Italians, and so Melbourne is actually the second biggest Greek city in the world, the city that has the second biggest number of Greek people after Athens.
So I'm sure that influences like the architecture of the city or the kind of food you can find.
Not so much the architecture, but yeah, definitely in terms of food. So like, and it's not just in Melbourne, but like all around Australia, like Greek food you can find it, like this kind of, we call it like gyros.
Gyros,
yeah.
Has anyone tried that before? Gyro?
In Toronto.
In Toronto, yeah.
It's good, right?
Yeah, very good.
Kind of reminds me of kebab. Personally.
Yeah.
So it looks like kebab.
It's kind of Greek version of kebab.
Yeah.
And Italian, so like pizza, pasta, spaghetti, this kind of thing. So, and yeah. Then in the 1960s and early 70s, there was the Vietnam War, and Australia had sent troops to the Vietnam War along with the US. And at this time, then some Vietnamese refugees were escaping. This is just a poster from the White Australia policy era, and you can see it says, March of the Great White Policy. Yeah, this is also not just this is a racist time, and it's also a sexist time. It's the white man's land. But this is the reopening of Asian immigration in the 1970s, because Australia had a war responsibility. We had participated in the Vietnam War. So this Prime Minister at the time said, we can't turn away Vietnamese refugees. We have this responsibility since we have a participation in the war. And so the photo on the left is some Vietnamese refugees who have escaped from Vietnam and are coming to Australia by boat. And on the right is a famous Australian comedian he fled to Australia with his family as a refugee when he was a child. His name's Ando, and he wrote this is the cover of his book called The Happiest Refugee. And then, after the first Vietnamese came, the immigration from all around Asia and then also from the Middle East began to increase.
Is it very easy to get citizenship?
Compared to other countries?
Relatively, yeah. I mean, compared to if I want to get Japanese citizenship, I think it's much easier for you to
super hard to get.
I think it's much easier for you to get. This is part they want to really focus on. What sort of challenges will people face if they go to live in Australia? So there's different patterns of community, of friendship, work-life balance,
Different
work
part of
relations.
friendship. Are Australian people friendly?
Yeah, I think Australia is a very friendly nation. But I think, say, like in Japan, you're much more centered around your formal groupings. So you have
high
your,
school group.
so you, say in your university, you have your zemi, and that's a very formal. You become very good, close friends with your zemi members. Or like in your work, you have a kind of nomikai that everyone at your work will go to. Whereas in Australia, then you can have your friends tend to much more be your private friends, not necessarily your work friends. Whereas in Japan, I feel you'll be friends with the people you work with in a much more formal kind of way. Whereas in Australia, it's a much more informal pattern of friendship.
And also something very different I find is that it says that changing jobs is relatively high.
Yeah. So Australia, we don't really have this kind of lifelong employment system, or merit-based, like shushin koyo or ninko joretsu. We don't really have this kind of system, except maybe in some government jobs. But it's very common to change your career at least once during your working life. Like in the case of my father, he was a computer programmer. He worked for more than 6 different companies or government departments, or Like he was working in a company in Chicago in the United States for 2 years. He worked at the Department of Immigration and the Australian Electoral Commission, and
Which is very different from
yeah.
what he was doing before, right?
So since he was doing a computer programming, then he was always working as a computer programmer, but he had to update his skills and change this computing skills he was doing to make it relevant to the different job he was doing. And sometimes people will completely change their career as well.
Australians think of changing jobs, changing your lifestyle, your routine as a good thing, right?
Yeah, so it's a new opportunity. You want to change your life you want to do something to make yourself happy. You want to earn more money, or you want to do this. I think in Japan, part of it is how long you've been at the company is part of your pardon?
Royalty to the company.
Yeah, it's part of your ranking is how long you've been at the company. But in Australia, this how long you've been at the company doesn't count for as much. It's much more merit-based system, or as you would say in Japanese, a kind of jitsuryoku shugi, merit-based. I mean, it's not the only factor, but merit plays a very large role. And this is the case across all kinds of jobs. So even in the Australian government jobs, there's plenty of they're Australians who are born overseas, and for instance, I know a woman who's the head of international division at the Department of Climate Change. She was born in Singapore and came across to Australia with her family as about 7, 8 years old. And she said to me almost what other country in the world could I have not been born in the country? I could be a non-white woman, and could I rise to become head of this division? So it's very merit-based.
Yeah.
Very, very, and this is a kind of Australian way of thinking is of give everybody a fair go. A fair go. So everyone deserves a chance. Everyone deserves a go.